I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, REFORGED.
I'll finish this.
Ever since Elucidator, you guys have been begging for another Sword Art Online build. And the comments have been pretty equal for all of them, so we chose the one we want to do the most, and that's Asuna's Rapier.
I surrender! Blacksmithing. I has it. I like the best. That one. But I also like savings the propane. So when men-at-arms decide to make Asuna's Rapier, I jump in it.
Ilya's going to start the day off by beginning forging on our blade. He moves to the nasal power hammer to start breaking the bar down. He's going to draw it out into a bar and then begin the real bladesmithing. We want to keep the whole thickness of this blade pretty even, add a little distal taper at the end, but we have some overlays to fit onto the blade, so having it nice and even before grinding really saves us a lot of time. At this stage, it's really important to keep everything nice and straight, so Ilya moves to the anvil with the hand hammer before returning to the heat. Ilya's gonna put the handle in first, and now uses a hot cut tool to remove the handle section. This will now allow Ilya to begin forging the shoulder and then pull out the tang. Historically, rapiers are primarily thrusting weapons. This blade is a little beefier than a historical rapier, but it still needs that taper for that nice powerful thrust. It's also going to be a bit of a slasher as well. We're going to add a really nice thick bevel to the edge. Should be pretty impressive by the time we get to the demos.
Begin!
Now that the blade is forged to our desired shape, Ilya is now going to start hand beveling. He's going to move to our sawyer's anvil and use a Japanese forging hammer to start this process.
When setting up the final geometry of the blade and the hand bevel, I'm using water to blast off the scale to allow me to see all the flaws that needed to be corrected. As I'm forging, I'm angling the blade slightly so that the angle of the hit of the hammer is the same as the angle of the anvil to the blade. That allows me to have a symmetric bevel from one side to another.
Now that the forging is complete, it's finally time for me to get to grinding. Before I do that, I wanted to show you guys something real quick. This is an anime rapier blade, and this is a historical rapier blade. I think you guys can tell the difference. This one is one I started last week. It's real light, it's mostly a thrusting blade. This one, it's still gonna be a thrusting blade, but it's a lot more exaggerated, much like most blades you find in animes. I'm gonna start by just refining that profile, then move on to the edge. Phase 1 of grinding is now complete. I got my profile defined where I wanted, got the tip nice and true. Now I'm gonna follow those bevels that Ilya forged in, keep them nice and steep.
Okay, Matt has just finished rough grinding Asuna's rapier blade here. The next step is to start figuring out the guard and the overlays. This is a similar design that we're going to go with. In order to make it work, I'm going to move the overlay a little farther forwards, just in front of that cross member. So my next step is to sketch out the rough shape before I go to the AutoCAD and draw it up and cut it out.
I'm about to heat treat Asuna's Rapier. This blade is made out of W2 blade steel, which has between 0.98 and 1% carbon content. This is a very, very good proper blade steel. The downside of this is you have to watch your heat treating temperatures, because if you overheat any section of it, you increase the grain growth and ruin the blade.
At this point, Ilya carefully removes the blade from the heat with a pair of tongs to make sure it doesn't bend. Places the blade into the oil nice and slow and evenly. And lets it quench for about 8 seconds. He'll then remove it. Check it for straightness. Move to the vise. He's got a couple seconds to work out any kinks that could be in that blade. So he gets as much out as he can, then clamps it vertically and walks away. Now that the blade is fully hardened, we have to temper it. We place the blade into a hot oil bath around 450 degrees for about an hour.
Asuna's rapier appears to be straight. No need for final fixing. It's ready for matte.
Alright, now that we have the blade completely heat treated and tempered and straightened, I can move on to start polishing it. I went ahead and fully ground everything before heat treating, so I don't have to take any more metal off, just enough to make it nice and pretty. So what we have to do next is we gotta start laying out the cup and the overlay for the cup. What Ilya did is he went ahead and took some thin sheet metal, formed a cup, and then we flattened it back out. So now I'm gonna trace some lines onto some paper. That'll give me my dimensions I need. Then I'll go into AutoCAD and get everything figured out. Now that we have the overlays welded to the base of the guard, Ilya can now hot form the guard to shape. He's going to use the horn of the anvil, form it over, leave a seam, we're going to weld that seam, and then blend it, and the base of our guard will be complete.
So, we've chosen to bend the rapier guard hot over the horn of the anvil. The reason for that is, if we would have bent the base plate first, which is this cross-section of a cone, and then placed the overlays on top, our overlays would not have fit around it because of the radiuses differences. There's a slight gap here that will be fixed cold, then the piece will be wire wheeled and given to John for final weld.
So the pommel on Asuna's rapier is very much like one of our regular production pommels. It needs to be a little bit larger, a little more elongated, not have this foot. So I'm just going to freehand turn it on the lathe and then we'll sand it and polish it.
To bend the applique for the blade, I clamp it to the tang, that way my bend replicates the geometry of the blade fairly closely, and hit it with a plastic mallet.
Now that our guard is formed and welded, we just gotta do some blending and remove all of the scale off the outside rim. So Sam moves to the sander to get this done. Now that we got our cup, it's time to start adding a little shape to our crossbar that'll fit inside and tie it all to the blade.
Matt uses the Bader sander to sculpt the crossbar to a much nicer form than this rough bar we start with.
In a lot of the pictures and when I watch the episodes, this crossbar is a really plain piece. It's usually just a straight bar. But since this is a rapier, I figure we might as well take the opportunity and add a little fanciness to the cross piece. The last thing I have to do is just shorten the ends up just a little bit so it fits just inside this inside lip.
John welds the crossbar and the cup on these pieces together. This will comprise the entire guard for this sword.
Alright, we're going to move on to sanding our wood handle to shape. Chose a piece of red oak. It's already round. I'm going to do a wasted form handle. mimics the silhouette of a woman's body. We're just gonna sand it in. Could use a lathe for this if you wanted to, but I wanna show you guys how we do it by hand.
So I'm going to be setting the bezels for the gemstones on here. I've got a little bit of acid flux already on the material and the bezel in place. I'm going to heat it from behind. The flux should kind of glue it in place. If it moves at all before I add solder, I'll just move it a little bit by hand. With the gemstone and bezel masked off, Matt now paints the entire guard to the proper color. Working directly on the Bader sanders, Matt sculpts the landjet to form. With all of the pieces of this sword beginning to come together, it's now time to get some polishing done.
This sword was a lot of fun to make. We got to do a lot of different processes. Forging, grinding, and a lot of fabrication, and even some gemstone settings. Really happy with this sword. Can't wait to see what it does in the demos.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.